Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I married my wife 6 years ago, and we have a 3.5-year-old son together. When he was born, my wife and I both agreed that one of us should stay home during his early years. Since her job in accounting paid better and had more stability, I became the stay-at-home dad. It's been challenging but rewarding, and I've learned more about parenting than I ever thought possible. My mother-in-law has always been a huge help to our family. She watches our son when we need to run errands together, brings us meals when we're overwhelmed, and genuinely loves being a grandmother. The problem is, she takes that role a bit too seriously sometimes. Her house is like a candy wonderland. She keeps drawers full of cookies. Her pantry is stocked with every sugary snack imaginable, and she believes that being a grandmother gives her special privileges. Her favorite phrase has become her battle cry whenever my wife or I try to set boundaries about what our son eats or when he eats it. She always says that being a grandmother means she can do whatever she wants. I've watched her give my 8-year-old nephew an entire angel food cake just to see what would happen. Spoiler alert, he ate the whole thing and spent the rest of the afternoon feeling miserable. As a stay-at-home dad, I've put a lot of effort into establishing routines and healthy eating habits. Our son knows that breakfast comes first, then maybe a small treat later in the day. He eats his vegetables before dessert, and we don't have candy for breakfast. These aren't unreasonable rules, but they seem to fly out the window whenever we visit his grandmother. This past weekend, we decided to stay at her house for a few days. It's a nice break from our routine, and she lives in a beautiful coastal town that we all enjoy visiting. But I knew what I was getting into the moment we walked through her door, and my son made a beeline for the cookie drawer. Saturday morning arrived, and I was in the kitchen getting breakfast ready for everyone. My son, who's smart enough to know exactly where he is and what he can get away with, immediately started asking for ice cream for breakfast. I told him no and suggested banana and yogurt instead. He kept pushing, asking for the chocolate chip cookies he knew were waiting for him in that drawer. I was slicing up a banana when I heard the cookie drawer sliding open behind me. I turned around to see my mother-in-law already handing my son 2 large chocolate chip cookies. I told her I'd appreciate it if she didn't feed my son cookies before 8:30 in the morning. She just gave me that sweet grandmother smile that said she was going to do whatever she wanted. She brushed off my concern and told me to let him live a little. I watched my son happily munch on cookies while his healthy breakfast sat untouched on his plate. This was exactly the kind of thing that made parenting harder when we got back home. He'd expect cookies for breakfast every day for a week. Later that morning, my wife and I decided to walk around town and check out some of the local shops. The coastal area is full of those touristy beach stores that sell everything from seashells to silly t-shirts. We were browsing through one of these shops when I overheard another customer talking to their friend about who would want a fart noisemaker on a keychain. Well, apparently this guy would. I immediately walked over to see what they were talking about, and there it was. A small plastic device with buttons that made different fart sounds. It was ridiculous, juvenile, and perfect. See, my mother-in-law has this thing about potty humor. She absolutely cannot stand it. She thinks it's disgusting and inappropriate, especially around children. Meanwhile, my son is a 3.5-year-old boy who thinks fart jokes are the pinnacle of comedy. The contrast between their views on bathroom humor has always been a source of tension during our visits. I bought the keychain without telling my wife what I was planning. She probably would have talked me out of it, and honestly, she would have been the reasonable one. But after the morning's cookie incident, I was feeling a little petty. When we got back to the house, I presented the gift to my son like it was a treasure. His eyes lit up when I showed him the keychain and explained that it had 6 different buttons, each one making a different fart sound. There were short ones, long ones, squeaky ones, and rumbling ones. It was like a symphony of bathroom humor. I told him to press a button and find out what it did. He pressed the first button and immediately dissolved into giggles. Then he pressed another one and another one. Soon he was cycling through all 6 sounds, laughing so hard he could barely breathe. It was honestly adorable to watch him have so much fun with something so simple. My mother-in-law walked into the room just when he hit the longest, most obnoxious fart sound the thing could make. She asked what that horrible noise was, and my son excitedly told her it was his fart machine. He demonstrated another button for her, and she visibly cringed. She said the whole thing was disgusting and asked where he got it. She looked directly at me, and I could see she knew exactly who was responsible. I casually mentioned that it was just a little something I picked up in town. My son was thrilled and wanted to show his grandmother all the different sounds. He pressed 3 buttons in rapid succession, creating a cacophony of fake fart sounds. He was having the time of his life, and she looked like she wanted to throw the thing in the garbage. She told me she hoped the thing would break soon because it was revolting. She kept making comments about how inappropriate it was and how she didn't understand why anyone would buy such a thing for a child. My son, meanwhile, was oblivious to her disapproval. He was too busy exploring every possible combination of sounds his new toy could make. The beautiful thing was that she couldn't do anything about it. She had just spent the morning ignoring my parenting decisions and overruling my authority in front of my son. But now the tables were turned. She couldn't take away his new toy without looking like the bad guy, especially when he was so obviously happy. For the next hour, the house was filled with fake fart sounds and genuine laughter. My son would press a button, giggle, run to show someone else, then come back to try a different sound. It was like he had discovered the secret to eternal happiness. My mother-in-law continued to grumble and make faces every time he used his new toy. She kept muttering about how disgusting it was and how she didn't understand why anyone would encourage such behavior. Finally, after watching her suffer through a long session of fart sound experimentation, I couldn't resist. I looked at her with the same sweet smile she had given me that morning and told her to come on and let him live a little. She knew exactly what I was doing, and she knew she had walked right into it. For a moment I thought she might argue with me, but then she just shook her head and walked away. My wife found the whole thing hilarious once she realized what had happened. She has dealt with her mother's boundary crossing for years and appreciated seeing someone turn the tables for once. She told me later that she was proud of how I handled it, even if my methods were a bit childish. The fart machine became my son's favorite toy for the rest of the weekend. Every time my mother-in-law started to complain about the noise or the inappropriate nature of it, I would just repeat her own words back to her. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the house. By Sunday afternoon, she had grown so tired of the constant fart sounds that she started suggesting other activities for my son. She offered to read him books, play with his other toys, or even watch cartoons together. Anything to get him away from that keychain. But my son was having too much fun to be distracted. He had found something that made him laugh uncontrollably, and he wasn't ready to give it up. Every few minutes, he would remember his new toy and start pressing buttons again. When we packed up to leave on Sunday evening, my son carefully placed his fart machine in his bag. He thanked his grandmother for the wonderful weekend and promised to bring his new toy back next time we visited. She forced a smile and told him he was always welcome, but I could see the panic in her eyes at the thought of that keychain returning to her house. During the car ride home, my wife and I talked about what had happened. She admitted that her mother needed to learn some boundaries and that maybe this experience would help her understand how frustrating it is when someone ignores your parenting decisions. My son fell asleep in his car seat, still clutching his fart machine. He had no idea that his new toy had served as the perfect weapon in a battle he didn't even know was being fought. When we got home, I decided to put the keychain away for a while. It had served its purpose, and I didn't need our house filled with fake fart sounds 24 hours a day. This whole mess started because I wanted to have a simple 17th birthday party. Nothing crazy, just a few close friends hanging out in our backyard, some music, cake, and maybe dancing under the string lights my dad had put up for me. I've been looking forward to it for weeks because junior year had been really stressful, and I just wanted one night to relax and celebrate with people I cared about. My parents were being super cool about the whole thing. They let me invite 8 friends and even said they'd stay mostly inside to give us space. My dad, though, he's always been my dance partner at family events, so I made him promise he'd come out for at least one song with me. He's been teaching me to swing dance since I was little, and it's become our thing. The party started exactly how I'd hoped. Everyone showed up on time, we had pizza, and I was genuinely happy. When my favorite song came on, my dad came outside and we did our usual dance routine. All my friends were cheering and taking videos, and I felt like everything was perfect. I remember thinking this was exactly what 17 should feel like, but then things got weird. I noticed that some of my friends had disappeared. At first, I didn't think much of it, maybe they went to the bathroom or something, but after about 30 minutes, I realized 5 of them were just gone. When I asked the remaining 3 where everyone went, they just shrugged and said they'd be back. What I didn't know was that while I was dancing with my dad and trying to be a good host to the friends who stayed, the missing group had snuck around to the front of our house. We have an outdoor fridge in our garage where my parents keep drinks for barbecues and stuff. These friends knew about it because they'd been over before for family events. They broke into that fridge and took beer and wine that definitely wasn't meant for them. I had no idea this was even happening because our garage is on the complete opposite side of the house from where we were partying. The music was loud, and I was focused on making sure everyone was having fun. Apparently, one of the guys got really drunk really fast. He started getting emotional about his relationship and decided that my birthday party was the perfect time to break up with his boyfriend over text message. Right there, sitting on my driveway in the dark, he sent a bunch of mean messages and then started crying. When someone's having a breakdown, friends rally around them. I get that. But what happened next still makes me angry. All 5 of them stayed huddled around this guy for the rest of the night. They didn't come back to the party. They didn't tell me what was happening. They just disappeared into their own little drama circle and left me wondering what I'd done wrong. I kept checking my phone, thinking maybe they'd texted to explain where they were. Nothing. I sent a few messages asking if everything was okay, but got short responses telling me they were fine and would be back soon. But they never came back, not really. The 3 friends who stayed with me were great, but I could tell they felt awkward too. We tried to keep the energy up, but it's hard to have a birthday party when more than half your guests have vanished. I kept looking toward the front of the house, wondering if I should go check on them, but I also didn't want to abandon the friends who were actually still there celebrating with me. Around 10 p.m., the missing group finally reappeared. The boyfriend's eyes were all red and puffy, and everyone else looked drained. They mumbled something about being sorry they missed some of the party, but they didn't explain what happened. We never did the happy birthday song because the moment felt too weird and fractured. When it was time for everyone to leave, I did what I always do. I made sure everyone felt appreciated. I gave each person a goodie bag with leftover cake, some candy I bought special for the party, and genuine hugs. Even though I felt confused and a little hurt, I didn't want anyone to leave feeling bad. The boyfriend barely looked at me when I hugged him goodbye. I told him I hoped everything was okay and thanked him for coming, but he just muttered something dismissive and walked away. The next morning I woke up expecting maybe some texts thanking me for the party or at least asking how I was feeling about everything. Instead, I got a group message that made my stomach drop. One of the girls, who I'll call Karen because that's exactly how she was acting, said, "We needed to talk about last night." When I asked what was up, she launched into this attack calling me a fake friend. She said the boyfriend had been going through a crisis and I didn't even care. I was completely confused and asked what crisis she was talking about. Another friend jumped in and told me not to act like I didn't know. They explained that he had broken up with his boyfriend and was crying, and I just kept partying like nothing was wrong. I tried to explain that I literally had no idea anything was wrong. I pointed out that they had disappeared and didn't tell me what was happening, but Karen shot back that I should have known something was up and come to check on them. She said that's what real friends do. I reminded them that they were at the front of the house while I was hosting the party in the backyard. I had asked where they went and nobody told me anything was serious, but the boyfriend himself chimed in, saying he couldn't believe I cared more about my stupid party than my friend having the worst night of his life. I stared at my phone, reading these messages over and over. I felt like I was in some alternate reality where I was supposed to be psychic. How was I supposed to comfort someone when I didn't even know they needed comforting? How was I the bad guy for hosting a party at my own birthday party? I apologized and said I was really sorry he was going through something hard, but I genuinely didn't know. I explained that if someone had told me what was happening, I would have been there for him, but Karen's response made my blood boil. She said I should have just known, and anyway, birthdays aren't that important. Friends are supposed to come first. That message hit me like a punch. Birthdays aren't that important. This was my 17th birthday, something I've been excited about for months. And friends are supposed to come first, but apparently I wasn't important enough to be told when my own friends were having a crisis at my own party. The worst part was finding out later that they'd stolen alcohol from our fridge. My mom discovered it the next day when she went to grab drinks for lunch. At first, my parents thought maybe some random kids had broken in, but when I pieced together the timeline, it became obvious what had really happened. When I confronted them about the stealing, that's when they really showed their true colors. Karen insisted it wasn't stealing if we were friends, saying friends share things. When I pointed out that they took alcohol without asking and got drunk at my party without telling me, another friend said I was being dramatic and it was just a few beers. The boyfriend claimed he was going through a crisis and needed it to cope, but I reminded him that being upset doesn't make stealing okay, and they could have seriously got my family in trouble if something had happened. That's when they really went nuclear. They started spreading rumors at school that I was selfish and didn't care about my friends. Karen told people I had kicked them out of my party for crying. The boyfriend claimed I had refused to help him during his breakdown. None of it was true, but people started giving me weird looks in the hallways. For about a week, I actually started believing maybe I was the problem. Maybe I should have somehow magically known what was happening. Maybe I should have abandoned my own birthday party to comfort someone who never even told me they needed comfort. But then my parents got involved. When they heard the full story, including the part about the stolen alcohol, they were furious. Not at me, at my so-called friends. My mom called their parents and explained exactly what had happened. The conversations my parents had with their parents were apparently pretty intense. Turns out most of their parents had no idea their kids had been drinking at all, let alone stealing alcohol from someone else's house. The boyfriend's mom was especially upset because she thought he'd been grounded from parties anyway. Within 2 days, I got a series of very different text messages. Each of them sent awkward apologies, clearly written under parental supervision. They admitted they were wrong to take the alcohol and said they were sorry for making my birthday about their drama. But by then, I was done. I thanked them for the apologies, but told each of them that our friendship was over. Real friends don't steal from your family, hijack your birthday party, and then blame you for not being psychic. Karen tried to argue, saying I was being too harsh and that everyone makes mistakes. I simply told her that some mistakes show who people really are, and I had learned enough about who she really was. The boyfriend sent me a long message trying to explain how heartbroken he was and how he wasn't thinking clearly. I acknowledged that breakups are hard, but reminded him that his pain didn't give him the right to ruin my birthday and steal from my family. My parents were proud of how I handled it. My dad told me that standing up for yourself isn't mean, it's necessary. My mom said she was glad I learned early that some people will take advantage of kindness if you let them. A few weeks later at school, some of the people who had been giving me weird looks came up and apologized. Apparently, Karen and her group had been telling different versions of the story to different people, and the inconsistencies were becoming obvious. When a few mutual friends asked me directly what happened, I told them the truth, and word spread pretty quickly about what really went down. Karen's reputation took a major hit. People started remembering other times she'd been entitled or manipulative. The boyfriend found himself with a lot fewer friends who wanted to deal with his drama. The others mostly just faded into the background, probably embarrassed about the whole thing. I ended up having a do-over birthday party a month later with my real friends, the 3 who had stayed with me that night, plus a few other people who actually cared about me. It was smaller, but it was perfect. We did the happy birthday song twice, just because we could. The reason I love working where I work so much is partly because of this one guy who sits near my desk. He's this elderly man in his 70s who uses a wheelchair to get around. He's been with the company for longer than anyone can remember, and he's basically a legend around the office. Despite his age, this guy is sharp as a tack when it comes to solving problems and helping out newer employees. He's patient, kind, and always willing to share his knowledge. I've learned more from him in 3 years than I did in college. What makes him even more special is that he never makes a big deal about who he is or his connections to the company. He just comes in every day, does his work, and treats everyone with respect. Most of the newer employees don't even know his background, and he likes it that way. So anyway, last month our company hired this new woman for the marketing department. From day one, she had this attitude like she was better than everyone else. She was probably in her late 20s, always dressed like she was going to some fancy business meeting, and had this way of talking down to people that rubbed everyone the wrong way. The trouble started during her second week. I was at my desk working on some code when I heard her voice getting louder near the elderly man's workspace. The new woman walked up to the elderly man and told him she needed to discuss something important with him. He politely asked what he could help her with. She explained that she had been observing the workflow and believed there was a serious problem with some people holding back the entire department's productivity. The elderly man looked confused but remained polite, asking her to clarify what specific concerns she had. That's when she dropped the bomb. She told him that people his age should have retired years ago. She guessed he was 70 or maybe older and said this was a fast-paced environment that needed young, energetic minds, not people who moved slowly and could barely use modern technology. Several other co-workers had stopped what they were doing to listen. The elderly man just sat there, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. He responded, assuring her that he pulled his weight around the office and had been doing this work for many years. But that just made Karen angrier. She said that was exactly the problem, that many years meant outdated methods and outdated thinking. She claimed companies needed to modernize by making room for people who actually understood 21st century business. She suggested he was probably just collecting a paycheck until he finally decided to retire and do everyone a favor. By now, a small crowd had gathered. People were looking at each other with shocked expressions. I'd never heard anyone talk to the elderly man like this before, and it was making everyone uncomfortable. The elderly man remained dignified, suggesting there might be some misunderstanding and that perhaps they should discuss this privately or that she should speak with management about her concerns. But Karen wasn't backing down. She said she planned to speak with management and that someone needed to tell them that keeping dead weight was hurting their bottom line. She accused him of being the reason young, qualified workers couldn't advance in their careers, saying he was literally taking up space that could be filled by someone who actually contributed something meaningful. That's when our department manager walked over. She'd heard the commotion and came to see what was happening. She asked if everything was okay, and Karen seemed thrilled to have someone in authority to complain to. Karen told the manager she was glad she was there because they needed to have a serious conversation about hiring practices and retirement policies. She said it wasn't fair to the rest of them who actually worked hard when they had to carry people who should have left the workforce years ago. The manager looked absolutely stunned. She looked at the elderly man, who just gave her a small nod like he was telling her it was okay. The manager warned Karen to be very careful about what she was saying, but Karen asked why she should be careful about pointing out an obvious problem that everyone was too polite to address. She claimed half the people there were probably thinking the same thing but were too scared to say it. She insisted this was a business, not a charity for senior citizens. That's when things got really interesting. The company owner had been walking through our floor, probably doing his usual rounds, and had heard the last part of the conversation. He walked up to our little group with a very serious expression and asked if he understood correctly that she had issues with one of their employees based on his age. Karen seemed thrilled that someone in a suit was finally listening to her complaints. She confirmed that, yes, exactly, and said she was glad someone with authority was finally paying attention. She told the owner that the elderly man was clearly past his prime and that it was embarrassing for a modern company to keep someone around who couldn't keep up with today's workplace demands. The owner looked at Karen for a long moment, then looked at the elderly man with genuine affection in his eyes. Then he dropped the bombshell that made everyone's jaw hit the floor. He told Karen he'd like her to meet his grandfather, who had founded the company 45 years ago. He explained that even though his grandfather had officially retired from his executive position years ago, he continued to work there because he loved what he did and because his knowledge and experience were invaluable to their team. The color drained from Karen's face instantly. You could hear a pin drop in our section of the office. The owner continued, explaining that every major decision in the company still went through his grandfather because his wisdom and insight had guided them through decades of growth and success. He said that when she called him dead weight who should retire, she was talking about the man who built everything she saw around her. Karen started stammering, trying to backtrack. She said she didn't know and that nobody had told her. But the owner explained that his grandfather preferred to work alongside everyone else as an equal team member, rather than pulling rank because he was humble like that. He told Karen that her behavior that day had shown him exactly what kind of person she was, and it wasn't the kind of person they wanted representing their company. The elderly man finally spoke up, still maintaining his dignity. He told his grandson that she was new and maybe they could just have a conversation about workplace respect and give her another chance. But the owner was having none of it. He told his grandfather he was too kind, but that what she had said was completely unacceptable. He fired Karen on the spot and told her to collect her things and leave immediately. That's when Karen completely lost it. She started screaming that this was ridiculous and that he couldn't fire her for telling the truth. She yelled that the whole place was run by dinosaurs who didn't understand modern business and threatened that he'd hear from her lawyer about age discrimination. The owner pointed out that the only discrimination there was what she had directed at his grandfather, and he called for security. But while security was walking over, Karen's eyes landed on a heavy-duty stapler sitting on a nearby desk. Something in her brain must have just snapped completely because she suddenly grabbed it and charged straight at the elderly man in his wheelchair. She was screaming something about showing him what happens to people who get in her way. This woman had completely lost her mind and was actually trying to attack a disabled elderly man with office equipment. Fortunately, several things happened at once. Two of my co-workers who had been standing near the elderly man immediately stepped in front of his wheelchair to shield him. At the same time, one of the security guards who had been approaching tackled Karen from behind before she could reach anyone. She hit the ground hard, still clutching the stapler and screaming about how unfair everything was. The security guard had to wrestle the stapler away from her while she kept trying to swing it around. The elderly man was completely calm through the whole thing. He just sat in his wheelchair protected by his co-workers and watched the security restrain Karen. He even asked if she was hurt when she hit the ground. Within minutes, the police arrived. Apparently, attacking someone with a weapon, even a stapler, is considered assault with a deadly weapon. They handcuffed Karen and read her rights while she continued screaming about lawsuits and discrimination. When they led her away, she was still yelling that she'd sue everyone and that we'd all regret treating her this way. The elderly man just shook his head sadly and said he hoped she got the help she clearly needed. The whole office was buzzing for weeks after that. We found out later that Karen had been fired from her previous 2 jobs for similar outbursts, but she'd apparently lied on her application about her employment history. The elderly man came back to work the next day like nothing had happened. When people asked if he was okay, he just smiled and said that in 45 years of business, you'll learn not to take things personally. Karen ended up being charged with attempted assault, making threats, and disturbing the peace. Her lawyer couldn't do much since everything was caught on the office security cameras. Karen became internet famous for all the wrong reasons. I work for a tech company and my job requires me to travel quite a bit for conferences and client meetings. My sister works in different field, but sometimes we end up going to the same cities for work events. When we realized we'd both be in Denver the same week, we decided to book the same flight to save money and catch up. My sister gets motion sickness easily, so she prefers window seats where she can look out and get some fresh air from the vent. I'm the opposite. I have a small bladder and drink way too much coffee, so I always book aisle seats to avoid climbing over people every hour. We've traveled together enough times to have this system down to a science. The flight was supposed to be pretty straightforward. 3 hours from Chicago to Denver, nothing fancy. We boarded and found our seats, my sister at 12A and me at 12C. There was already someone sitting in 12B, a woman probably in her 50s wearing a bright purple sweater and way too much perfume. When we sat down, she turned to us with this fake smile. She asked if we were together and offered to switch seats so we could sit next to each other. My sister politely explained that we were fine like this because she liked the window and I preferred the aisle. The woman insisted, asking if we were sure and saying she really didn't mind moving. I thanked her for the offer but told her we were good with our current seats. I could tell she was a little put off by our response, but honestly, we had chosen these seats for a reason. Why would we want to switch to middle seats just to sit next to each other when we could already talk across her? I had grabbed a small bag of trail mix from the airport shop and wanted to give it to my sister since she hadn't eaten much that morning. When I was getting settled, I passed it over to her and asked her to hold on to it until I got my stuff organized. She said thanks and took it. That's when Karen completely lost it. She demanded to know if we were going to be rude and pass things to each other the entire flight. I was genuinely confused and asked what she meant since it was literally one small bag of nuts. I explained that I had just asked my sister to hold one thing while I got settled in my seat, and once I was buckled in, I would take it back. I told her my sister was planning to sleep for most of the flight anyway, and I would just be watching movies on my tablet. Karen called us inconsiderate and said she was stuck in the middle and now had to deal with us reaching across her constantly. My sister pointed out that we weren't going to be reaching across her and that she was literally just holding a snack bag for 30 seconds. But Karen was on a roll now. Her voice kept getting louder and other passengers were starting to look over. She went on about how she had offered to switch seats and we had rudely declined, and now we were going to make her flight miserable by treating her like she was invisible. I tried to explain that we declined because we preferred the seats we booked, and that wasn't rude but just our preference. Karen shot back that our preference was selfish and we were both incredibly inconsiderate. At this point, I was getting annoyed. We had done absolutely nothing wrong. We booked our seats, we politely declined a seat swap we didn't want, and I passed my sister one item. That was it. The flight attendant came by doing the usual safety check, but Karen was just getting started. When we were taxiing to the runway, she kept making loud sighs and complaining under her breath about how rude young people are these days. My sister put her headphones on and closed her eyes, trying to ignore her. About an hour into the flight, my sister needed to use the bathroom. This is where things got really ridiculous. She politely asked to get by, but Karen just sat there, not moving. When my sister repeated her request, Karen sarcastically asked if now she wanted to inconvenience her. She made this huge production of unbuckling her seatbelt and standing up, huffing and puffing like my sister had asked her to donate a kidney. But then she did something that made my blood boil. Instead of stepping into the aisle to let my sister pass, Karen just stood there in her spot, blocking the way. She started waving at people in the rows ahead of us and telling them to go ahead. She was literally directing other passengers to go to the bathroom before my sister, who was standing right there waiting. 3 people went ahead of her before Karen finally stepped aside with this smug look on her face. My sister told her that was really unnecessary. Karen replied that maybe next time she would think twice before being so rude to her fellow passengers. When my sister came back, Karen pulled the same stunt, making her wait while she chatted with the flight attendant about the temperature in the cabin. I had enough. I asked her what exactly her problem was, pointing out that we had been nothing but polite to her the entire flight. Karen exploded, saying our problem was that we thought the world revolved around us. She listed off our supposed crimes. We wouldn't switch seats. We were constantly disrupting her, and now we were demanding she move on our schedule. Her voice was getting loud enough that the flight attendant noticed and came over to ask if everything was okay. Karen immediately switched to victim mode and told the flight attendant that we had been harassing her the entire flight. She claimed we had refused to switch seats so we could sit together, that we kept passing things back and forth over her, and now we were demanding she move whenever we wanted. I told the flight attendant that wasn't what happened at all. I had passed my sister one snack bag at the beginning of the flight, and she just needed to use the bathroom. The flight attendant asked me to keep my voice down. Karen triumphantly pointed out that we were being aggressive now too. The flight attendant looked confused but tried to mediate by suggesting we find a solution that worked for everyone. I explained that the solution was for her to act like a normal person. We had booked these specific seats. We weren't bothering anyone, and she was the one causing problems. That's when Karen made her biggest mistake. She announced that she was calling the police when we landed because this was harassment and assault. Assault? I hadn't even touched her. The flight attendant suggested that might be an overreaction, but Karen insisted she wanted to file a complaint because she was being terrorized. The flight attendant had clearly dealt with difficult passengers before and pulled out a small notebook saying she would get the details straight and asking what exactly had happened. Karen launched into this wild story about how we had been aggressive and threatening, how we were constantly disrupting her, and how we had physically intimidated her. When the flight attendant asked when the physical intimidation occurred, Karen said it was when I leaned over to give my sister that bag. The flight attendant clarified she meant the snack bag at the beginning of the flight, and Karen confirmed, saying I had invaded her personal space. The flight attendant looked at me, then at my sister, then back at Karen, and pointed out that passing a snack bag to a family member wasn't physical intimidation. Karen accused everyone of ganging up on her. At this point, other passengers were openly staring, and a few were recording on their phones. The flight attendant made a note in her book and explained that when we landed, if Karen wanted to file a formal complaint, she could speak with airport security. Karen seemed pleased with this, like she had won some kind of victory. When we landed, Karen was the first person off the plane. She walked straight to the gate agent, and we could see her gesturing wildly, clearly telling her version of events. We gathered our things and walked over, curious to see how this would play out. The gate agent listened politely when Karen demanded that airport security be called immediately to arrest us for assault and harassment. She described us as dangerous and claimed we had threatened her throughout the flight. But here's where Karen's plan backfired spectacularly. The gate agent asked if there were any witnesses to these alleged crimes. Karen confidently said yes, that everyone on the plane had seen our behavior. The gate agent then called over to the flight attendant, who had just finished her post-flight duties. When asked about the incident, the flight attendant explained that there had been a minor disagreement over seat arrangements, but that we had been polite throughout and the only person raising their voice or causing a disturbance was Karen herself. Karen's face went red when she insisted the flight attendant was lying. But then other passengers started approaching. A businessman who had been sitting behind us told the gate agent that the lady in purple had been loud and obnoxious the entire flight, while we had barely said a word. A mother with 2 kids confirmed that Karen had been the problem, not us. The final nail in the coffin came when a teenager showed the gate agent a video on his phone. Apparently, he had recorded Karen's meltdown when she was yelling about calling the police. The gate agent watched when Karen ranted about being terrorized while we sat quietly in our seats. The gate agent politely told Karen that based on witness statements and video evidence, there was no basis for any complaint against us. In fact, if anyone had grounds for a complaint, it would be us against her for harassment and disturbing other passengers. Karen demanded to speak to a manager, but by then airport security had arrived. They had been monitoring the situation and quickly determined that Karen was the problem passenger, not us. They escorted her away from the gate area while she continued to rant about the injustice of it all. I've been working at this mid-sized company for 4 years. I handled reception duties, managed office supplies, coordinated meetings, and dealt with various paperwork. One thing I definitely did not handle was timesheets. That was always the manager's responsibility. They needed to verify who was actually working, approve overtime, handle vacation requests, and make sure everything was accurate for payroll. Our previous manager was great. He understood the system, respected everyone's roles, and never tried to dump his responsibilities on other people. Then he got promoted to regional office, and we got his replacement. The new guy walked in on his first Monday like he owned the place. He was one of those managers who thought being in charge meant you could just reassign your duties to whoever you wanted. Within his first week, he'd already rubbed half the office the wrong way with his attitude. On Friday of that first week, he called me into his office and told me I needed to take over the timesheets starting next week. I was confused and told him that timesheets were a management responsibility. He insisted that since he was the manager, he could decide it was my job now. I tried to explain that I didn't have access to the scheduling system and didn't know everyone's arrangements. Some people worked flexible hours, some were part-time, some worked from home certain days. He brushed off my concerns and said I should figure it out. He claimed that since I was administrative staff, this was administrative work. I tried to explain that timesheets weren't just administrative busy work. They required managerial oversight because he needed to verify actual work performed, approve any overtime, and ensure accuracy for payroll purposes. But he wasn't having it. He told me he had more important things to do than fill out timesheets and said I should just mark everyone as working their standard hours. That's when alarm bells started going off in my head. I asked him to clarify if he wanted me to mark everyone as working standard hours regardless of whether they actually did. He said yes, unless I knew for certain they weren't there. I asked about people who called in sick or took vacation days or worked overtime. He just repeated that I should figure it out. I could see this was going nowhere. He clearly didn't understand the legal and financial implications of what he was asking, but he was determined to make it my problem. I told him I wanted this request in writing. He seemed annoyed by this, but agreed. 20 minutes later, I had an email telling me to handle all timesheet duties going forward and to use standard schedules unless I had specific knowledge otherwise. Perfect. The following Monday, I started my new timesheet duties. I went through our employee list systematically. Everyone who was scheduled for 5 days, 9 to 5, got marked for exactly that. 37.5 hours per week, every week. It didn't matter that our part-time receptionist only worked 3 days a week. Standard schedule. It didn't matter that our senior accountant was out for 2 days with the flu. Standard schedule. It didn't matter that 3 people in sales had worked late every night that week trying to close month-end deals. Standard schedule. It didn't matter that our office coordinator had taken Friday off for a family wedding. Standard schedule. When people asked me about their timesheet entries, I just shrugged and said I was following the new manager's instructions to use standard schedules. Some of them went to talk to him, but he just told them to work it out with me since timesheets were my department now. This went on for 3 weeks. I submitted every timesheet exactly as instructed. Everyone got their standard hours, no exceptions, no variations, no overtime, no sick days, no vacation time deducted. Then payroll called. The payroll manager was confused because the timesheets didn't match any of the leave requests, overtime approvals, or schedule changes that had been submitted through proper channels. People who had worked 60-hour weeks were only being paid for 37.5. People who had taken unpaid sick days were getting paid anyway. People who had used vacation time weren't having it deducted from their balances. Payroll contacted my manager directly since timesheets are ultimately management's responsibility regardless of who fills them out. I heard him on the phone trying to explain the situation. He told them that his administrative assistant handled the timesheets now. Payroll pointed out that the timesheets didn't reflect actual hours worked or leave taken. He explained that he had told me to use standard schedules. Payroll asked if he had told me to falsify timesheets. There was a long pause. He said no and tried to ask if they could just process them as they were. Payroll refused and said the timesheets needed to be corrected immediately and they needed to discuss proper timesheet procedures. Within an hour, my manager was back at my desk saying we needed to fix the timesheets. I asked what was wrong with them since I had followed his instructions exactly. He explained that I couldn't just put everyone down for standard hours when they didn't work standard hours. I reminded him that he had told me to use standard schedules unless I had specific knowledge otherwise. He said I knew some of these people were out sick or on vacation. I told him that since he had said he had more important things to do than timesheets, I had assumed he didn't want me bothering him with details. The next day, he sent me another email taking back timesheet responsibilities. Just like that, timesheets were management duties again. For the rest of my time at that company, he never tried to reassign any of his core management responsibilities to administrative staff. He learned pretty quickly that some jobs exist at the management level for very good reasons. The funniest part was watching him struggle through the proper timesheet process for the first time. Guess tracking everyone's actual hours, leave time, and schedule variations was more complicated than he thought. I kept that email where he reassigned timesheet duties to me, just in case, but I never needed it. He couldn't complain about me following his written instructions too literally without admitting he'd given me inappropriate instructions in the first place. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.